The first F-22 Raptor noticed something wrong at 3:47 hours, 37,000 feet above the Nevada test range. Major Kai Viper Mitchell had been flying these patrol routes for 3 years, long enough to know that the desert below never changed. Sand, rock, scattered Joshua trees casting twisted shadows under the star-drunk sky. Nothing ever moved down there except wind and the occasional coyote. But tonight something was different. A single point of light blinked once, then twice, then died in the vast emptiness of Sector 7 Delta. Not the steady glow of a radio tower or the harsh white beam of a searchlight. This was different, softer, redder, gone before you could be sure you'd seen it at all. Tower Viper 1, Mitchell's voice crackled through the comm. Got a visual anomaly in 7 Delta, grid reference 340-1228. Single light source, intermittent. The response came back tired, routine. Copy Viper 1, probably another drunk tourist with road flares. Rangers will check it out in the morning. But Kai Mitchell had logged over 2,000 flight hours in restricted airspace, and something about that brief red bloom felt wrong. Too isolated, too deliberate, too much like a signal. The F-22's heads-up display showed nothing on radar. No heat signatures, no electronic emissions, just empty desert stretching to the horizon under a canopy of stars so thick they seemed to press down against the cockpit glass. Mitchell banked left, bringing the Raptor around in a wide arc, night vision systems scanning the coordinates where that mysterious light had flickered and died. 3 miles below, the desert kept its secrets. But somewhere in that maze of arroyos and sandstone ridges, something or someone had sent a message into the night sky. A message that only a pilot would understand. A message that spoke in the ancient language of aviation distress signals, older than radar, older than radio, older than everything except the simple human need to be found when you're lost. The flare had blinked in a pattern, 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. SOS. The universal cry for help sent up into the darkness by someone who knew that F-22s patrolled this sector every night at 3:47 hours. Someone who understood military flight patterns. Someone who was waiting. Major Mitchell pulled back on the stick, climbing toward 40,000 feet while the mystery below gnawed at her like hunger. In 6 hours, the sun would rise over the Nevada wasteland, and whatever story was unfolding in Sector 7 Delta would either reveal itself or disappear forever into the endless silence of the desert. But something told her this wasn't about drunk tourists or road flares. This was about Unit 29, and Unit 29 had been missing for 17 years. The radio chatter that night carried an undercurrent of tension that even the most junior pilots could feel. Word had spread through Nellie's Air Force Base like wildfire. Someone was signaling from the restricted zone, where Unit 29 had vanished in 2007. Unit 29. 3 F-16 Fighting Falcons on a routine training mission that had simply disappeared from radar screens on a clear Tuesday morning, taking with them their pilots and a mystery that had haunted the base for nearly 2 decades. Captain Elena Ghostwriter Vasquez had been 17 years old when Unit 29 went missing. Back then, she was just another Air Force brat hanging around the flight line, dreaming of wings and wondering if girls like her could really make it as fighter pilots. Her father, Master Sergeant Carlos Vasquez, had worked maintenance on those same F-16s. He'd spent months afterward walking the desert on his days off, searching for wreckage that never materialized, for answers that never came. Now Elena flew her own F-22 through the same airspace where those 3 pilots had vanished, and tonight she was part of the expanded search pattern that had deployed after Viper 1's report. 6 Raptors spread across the Nevada test range, their stealth profiles invisible to everything except the stars. They moved like ghosts through the darkness, scanning for any trace of the signal that had appeared and disappeared in grid 340-1228. Ghostwriter, this is Tower. The controller's voice was crisp, professional, but Elena could hear the undercurrent of excitement. We're picking up intermittent electronic emissions from your sector. Very faint, possibly emergency transponder. Alina's pulse quickened. Emergency transponders were designed to operate for years after a crash, powered by lithium batteries that could outlast entire military careers. If Unit 29 had gone down somewhere in these mountains, if the pilots had survived long enough to activate their emergency beacons, those transponders could still be broadcasting their silent cry for help across the desert. Tower Ghost Rider, I'm not seeing anything on my instruments. Can you give me a bearing? Ghost Rider, we're triangulating now. Signal is extremely weak, intermittent. Best guess puts you within 5 miles of the source. 5 miles. In the air, 5 miles was nothing. On the ground, in the rugged terrain of the Nevada Test Range, 5 miles was an eternity of hidden canyons, cave systems, and badlands that could swallow entire aircraft without leaving a trace. Alina banked toward the coordinates, her night vision systems penetrating the darkness below. The desert looked like the surface of an alien world. Harsh ridges and deep shadows, ancient lake beds cracked into geometric patterns, Joshua trees standing like sentries in the moonlight. Beautiful and terrible and utterly unforgiving. The kind of landscape that could hide secrets for decades. Alina's radio crackled with reports from the other Raptors. Nothing on thermal, nothing on radar, nothing but the vast emptiness of the restricted zone and the weight of 17 years' worth of unanswered questions. But somewhere down there, someone or something was calling. The signal pattern emerged slowly, like a photograph developing in chemical baths. Lieutenant Commander Maya Compass Delacroix had been monitoring electronic emissions from the base communications center for 4 hours when she finally saw it. Not random static or equipment malfunction, but something deliberate, something human. 3 short pulses, 3 long pulses, 3 short pulses, then silence for exactly 90 seconds before the pattern repeated. "Colonel, you need to see this." Maya's voice carried across the comm center with unusual urgency. Colonel Sarah Hayes, commander of the 65th Aggressor Squadron, had been drinking her 5th cup of coffee and reviewing flight manifests when Maya's call pulled her away from her desk. The communications console displayed a waterfall of electronic signatures cascading down the screen in blues and greens and yellows. Radio frequencies, radar returns, transponder codes, the constant electromagnetic chatter of a military airspace. But Maya had isolated one specific signal, enhanced it, cleaned it up until the pattern was unmistakable. "SOS," Colonel Hayes said quietly. "Someone's transmitting SOS on emergency frequency 243. Every 90 seconds, ma'am. Signal strength suggests ground-based transmission, probably low-powered emergency equipment. The timing is too precise to be accidental." Colonel Hayes studied the display, her mind working through the implications. Emergency frequency 243 was monitored by rescue services worldwide. Any pilot in distress would know to transmit on that frequency. But who would be transmitting from the restricted zone? The area had been swept repeatedly after Unit 29's disappearance. Every canyon, every cave system, every possible crash site had been searched by teams of specialists. "How long has this signal been active?" Hayes asked. Maya checked her logs. First detected it approximately 40 minutes ago, right around the time Viper 1 reported the visual anomaly. "But Colonel," she paused, highlighting another section of data on her screen. "The signal isn't coming from grid 340-1228 where Viper 1 saw the flare. It's coming from approximately 15 miles northeast, grid 356-41. 15 miles. Close enough to suggest a connection, far enough apart to indicate movement, or multiple sources." Colonel Hayes felt the familiar weight of command settling on her shoulders. She'd been in charge of the 65th Aggressor Squadron for 3 years, and in that time she'd dealt with everything from training accidents to international incidents. But this was different. This touched on something deeper than routine military operations. This was about the ghosts that haunted every air base, the pilots who went up and never came down. Maya, I want you to maintain continuous monitoring on that frequency. Log every transmission, every variation in signal strength. If someone's really down there, if they're really alive after 17 years. She trailed off, not wanting to voice the thought that was forming in her mind. Maya nodded, already reaching for her headset. Yes, ma'am. What about search and rescue? Colonel Hayes looked out the window toward the flight line, where F-22 Raptors sat silent under the floodlights. We're already searching. The question is what we're going to find. Dawn was still 3 hours away when the breakthrough came. Staff Sergeant David Prophet Kim had been analyzing the signal intercepts when he noticed something that made him sit bolt upright in his chair. He'd been running the transmissions through pattern recognition software, looking for any hidden meaning in the timing, the frequency modulation, the signal strength variations. What he found was impossible. The signal, he said slowly, staring at his screen. It's not just SOS. There's another layer, the intervals between transmissions. They're not random. Maya rolled her chair over to Prophet's workstation, studying the data he'd isolated. The SOS pattern was clear, 3 short, 3 long, 3 short, but Prophet had discovered that the 90-second intervals between each transmission weren't consistent. Sometimes 90 seconds, sometimes 91, sometimes 89. It's Morse code, Prophet said, his voice barely a whisper. The timing variations. Someone's encoding a message in the delay patterns. Maya felt her heart rate spike. What does it say? Prophet's fingers flew across his keyboard, running the timing data through Morse code translation software. Letters began appearing on his screen, one by one, as the program decoded 17 years of patient transmission. UNIT, TWNTY, NINEALIV. Unit 29 alive, Maya read aloud. Jesus Christ, they're alive. But Prophet wasn't finished. The message continued, more letters appearing as the translation software processed the full signal pattern. LONENEAD, HELP, CANT, MOVE. Unit 29 alive alone need help can't move. Maya grabbed her radio, her hands shaking. Colonel Hayes to communications immediately. Priority Alpha, we've got survivors. The base erupted into controlled chaos. Within minutes, rescue helicopters were spinning up on the flight line. Search and rescue teams were gearing up for a dawn insertion. Medical teams were preparing for casualties who had been missing for nearly 2 decades. But even as the rescue operation mobilized, questions multiplied. How had Unit 29 survived for 17 years in the desert? Why had their emergency transponders remained silent until tonight? What had triggered their decision to finally call for help? And most importantly, what had they seen out there in the restricted zone that had kept them hidden for so long? Maya maintained her vigil at the communications console, monitoring the steady pulse of the SOS signal. Every 90 seconds, like a heartbeat, like hope refusing to die. She thought about the pilots of Unit 29, wherever they were hiding in the vast wilderness of the test range, finally breaking their silence after 17 years of isolation. Soon, the sun would rise over Nevada, and the mystery would begin to unravel. But Maya had the feeling that when all the answers finally came to light, they would raise even more questions about what really happened to Unit 29 and why they had chosen to remain hidden for so long. The rescue helicopters lifted off just as the first pale light touched the eastern mountains. 2 A-60 Black Hawks loaded with search and rescue personnel, medical equipment, and enough supplies for an extended operation in hostile terrain. Leading the formation was Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Sledgehammer Rodriguez, a veteran pilot with over 15 years of combat search and rescue experience. But this wasn't combat. This was something else entirely. This was archaeology, digging up ghosts from the Nevada desert. The coordinates led them into the heart of the restricted zone, over terrain so rugged that even military maps labeled it simply as Badlands. Slot canyons carved by ancient floods, sandstone formations twisted by millennia of wind, hidden valleys where the sun never fully penetrated, where shadows pooled like dark water. Search 1, this is Sledgehammer, Rodriguez's voice crackled over the radio. We're approaching grid 356-41. I've got eyes on possible shelter locations in the canyon system below, beginning descent for closer examination. The Black Hawk dropped toward the desert floor, rotor wash kicking up clouds of dust and sand. Through the swirling debris, Rodriguez could make out the mouth of a narrow canyon, barely wide enough for the helicopter to navigate. But something had caught his eye, a reflection, brief and metallic, from deep within the canyon walls. Search 2, maintain overwatch position. I'm taking us in for a closer look. The canyon walls rose on either side of the helicopter like the ribs of some massive prehistoric creature. Layers of red and orange sandstone told the story of millions of years, but Rodriguez was more interested in the story of the last 17 years. Somewhere in this maze of stone and shadow, the pilots of Unit 29 had been surviving, waiting, planning their eventual emergence from hiding. Then he saw it, camouflaged so perfectly that it was almost invisible, tucked into a natural alcove in the canyon wall about 60 feet above the canyon floor. The tail section of an F-16 Fighting Falcon, its vertical stabilizer barely visible through the careful arrangement of desert camouflage netting. Control, search 1. We've got aircraft wreckage. Repeat, we have visual confirmation of aircraft wreckage in the canyon system. Beginning search for survivors. Rodriguez guided the Black Hawk to a landing zone about 100 meters from the canyon entrance. The search and rescue team deployed quickly, their boots hitting the sand as the helicopter's engines wound down to a whisper. Team leader Master Sergeant Angela "Lifeline" Thompson immediately began coordinating the ground search, her team spreading out in a standard pattern. But before they could advance into the canyon, a voice called out from the shadows above. Weak, hoarse, but unmistakably human. Identify yourselves. Thompson looked up toward the source of the voice, shading her eyes against the morning sun. This is United States Air Force Search and Rescue. We're here to help. Are you injured? A long pause, then, we've been waiting for someone to find us, but we need to know, what year is it? Thompson felt a chill run down her spine despite the desert heat. It's 2024. You've been missing for 17 years. Another pause, longer this time. Then a figure appeared at the edge of the alcove, silhouetted against the canyon wall. Human but thin, weathered by years of desert survival. The figure raised one hand in acknowledgement, then called down again. 17 years, Jesus, we thought. We hoped it hadn't been that long. The figure disappeared back into the shadows, and Thompson heard voices conferring urgently above. Then the same voice called down again, stronger now. We're coming down, there are 3 of us. We need medical attention, but we're mobile. Stand by. Thompson keyed her radio. Control, search 1 Alpha. We have contact with 3 survivors. Repeat, 3 survivors are mobile and responsive. Beginning extraction procedures. As the first figure began rappelling down the canyon wall on a makeshift rope system, Thompson wondered what story these 3 pilots would tell. What had kept them hidden for 17 years? What had finally convinced them to break their silence and call for rescue? The answers, she suspected, were going to change everything they thought they knew about Unit 29's disappearance. The first survivor to reach the canyon floor was a woman in her 50s, her flight suit faded and patched, but still recognizable as Air Force issue. Her face was deeply tanned, lined by years of desert sun, but her eyes were sharp and alert. She moved with the careful precision of someone who had learned to conserve every ounce of strength, every unnecessary motion eliminated through years of survival discipline. Master Sergeant Thompson approached with her hands visible, palms open, the universal gesture of peaceful intent. "Ma'am, I'm Master Sergeant Thompson, United States Air Force. We're here to get you home." The woman studied Thompson's uniform, her insignia, the modern equipment carried by the rescue team. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of 17 years of isolation. "I'm Captain Rebecca Nightshade Morrison, serial number 2847 Delta 729, Unit 29, 421st Fighter Squadron." Thompson felt her breath catch. Captain Morrison had been 28 years old when Unit 29 disappeared. Now she looked like a woman in her 50s, aged by desert hardship but still possessed of an inner strength that radiated authority despite her circumstances. "Captain, we have medical personnel standing by. Can you tell me about your companions?" Morrison looked up toward the alcove where two other figures were preparing to descend. Major Patricia Ironwing Santos, our flight leader, and Lieutenant James Rookie Harrison. All three of us are mobile, conscious, and, well, as healthy as you can be after 17 years in hell. The rope system groaned as the second survivor began rappelling down the canyon wall. This was Major Santos, older than Morrison, her hair gone completely gray but her movements still showing the controlled athleticism of a military pilot. She touched down beside Morrison and immediately began scanning the rescue team with tactical awareness that 17 years of isolation hadn't diminished. "Major Santos," Thompson said, offering the same greeting. "Ma'am, we have helicopters standing by for immediate evacuation to Nellie's AFB. Medical facilities are prepared for your arrival." Santos nodded but held up one hand. "Sergeant, before we go anywhere, you need to understand something. We didn't crash. We landed. We've been maintaining radio silence for 17 years because we discovered something in the restricted zone that changes everything." The third member of Unit 29 completed his descent just as Santos finished speaking. Lieutenant Harrison looked younger than his companions, though 17 years of desert survival had carved deep lines around his eyes. He moved to flank Morrison and Santos, the three of them unconsciously forming a defensive triangle, a formation that spoke of years spent trusting no one but each other. "Control, search 1 Alpha," Thompson keyed her radio. "Be advised, survivors are indicating their situation may be more complex than originally assessed, requesting immediate secure channel for classified briefing." Morrison stepped forward, her voice carrying the authority of rank despite her appearance. "Sergeant, what we found out here, it's the reason we stayed hidden. It's the reason we couldn't come home. And it's the reason we finally decided to break radio silence and call for extraction." She looked toward the mouth of the canyon, where morning shadows were beginning to retreat before the advancing sun. "There's something in the restricted zone that your people need to know about. Something that's been here a lot longer than Unit 29. Thompson felt the familiar chill of classified operations, the weight of secrets that exceeded her security clearance. Whatever Unit 29 had discovered 17 years ago, it had been significant enough to keep 3 Air Force pilots in voluntary exile for nearly 2 decades. "Ma'am, we'll get you back to base where you can brief the appropriate authorities. Right now, my priority is your medical evaluation and safe extraction." Morrison nodded, but her expression remained grave. "Understood, Sergeant, but you should know we weren't hiding from the Air Force. We were hiding from something else." The medical evaluation at Nellie's Air Force Base revealed the impossible. 3 pilots who had survived 17 years in one of the harshest environments on Earth, not only alive but in remarkably good physical condition. Dr. Sarah Chen, the base's chief medical officer, had seen a lot of unusual cases in her 20-year career, but nothing quite like Unit 29. Captain Morrison's blood work showed signs of chronic dehydration managed through careful water conservation. Her muscle mass was reduced but functional, her cardiovascular system adapted to high-altitude desert survival. Most remarkably, her psychological evaluation suggested someone who had maintained mission discipline and command structure throughout 17 years of isolation. "How did you survive?" Dr. Chen asked during Morrison's debriefing. "Water sources in that region are virtually non-existent, food sources even more limited." Morrison's answer was delivered with the matter-of-fact precision of a military briefing. "We found a natural water source in the canyon system, spring-fed, reliable year-round. As for food, we learned to live off the land. Desert plants, small game when we could catch it. The F-16s carried survival rations that lasted us the first few months while we adapted." "But 17 years, Captain. That's not survival, that's establishing a permanent settlement." Morrison's expression darkened. "Doctor, we didn't have a choice. What we discovered in the restricted zone, we couldn't risk bringing that information back until we were certain it was safe to do so." Dr. Chen made notes on her tablet, but her clinical curiosity was shifting toward something else. Fear. What kind of discovery would keep 3 pilots in voluntary exile for 17 years? Morrison looked toward the window of the medical facility, where F-22 Raptors were visible on the distant flight line. Modern aircraft that hadn't existed when Unit 29 had disappeared. Technology that had advanced while they remained frozen in time in the Nevada desert. "Something that made us realize we weren't alone out there," Morrison said quietly. "And something that made us question everything we thought we knew about the restricted zone." Before Dr. Chen could press for more details, Major Santos entered the medical bay. She'd completed her own evaluation and was now wearing a fresh flight suit, her captain's bars replaced with Major's leaves that she'd earned 17 years ago but never had the chance to wear. "Rebecca, they want to see us in the briefing room. All 3 of us. Full debriefing with the base commander." Morrison nodded and stood from the examination table. "Doctor, I want to thank you for your professionalism. But you should know, what we're about to reveal in that briefing room is going to change how the Air Force views the restricted zone, and it's going to change how we think about what we're really protecting out there." Dr. Chen watched the 2 pilots leave. Their desert-weathered flight suits a stark contrast to the sterile modernity of the medical facility. Whatever Unit 29 had discovered in the Nevada wasteland, it had been significant enough to keep them in hiding for nearly 2 decades. Now they were finally ready to share that secret. But as Dr. Chen reviewed their medical files, she couldn't shake the feeling that some secrets were better left buried in the desert sand. The briefing room was packed with personnel representing every level of the Nellis Air Force Base command structure. Colonel Hayes sat at the head of the table, flanked by intelligence officers, security personnel, and representatives from Air Combat Command. At the far end of the room, 3 monitors displayed satellite imagery of the Nevada test range, focusing on the canyon system where Unit 29 had been discovered. Captain Morrison stood at the front of the room, her 17 years of isolation evident in the way she studied the unfamiliar faces around the table. Technology had advanced, personnel had rotated through assignments, but the basic structure of military briefings remained unchanged. She began with the facts. On the morning of March 15, 2007, Unit 29 was conducting a routine training mission in restricted airspace. We were flying a 3-ship formation, practicing high-altitude intercepts. At approximately 9:30 hours, we encountered an unidentified aerial phenomenon. Colonel Hayes leaned forward in her chair. "Define phenomenon, Captain." Morrison activated the laser pointer and indicated a position on the satellite map. Grid reference 340-7235. We observed what appeared to be a structured object, approximately 60 meters in length, exhibiting flight characteristics that exceeded any known aircraft performance parameters. The room went silent. Major Santos stepped forward, adding her testimony. The object demonstrated instantaneous acceleration, 90-degree directional changes without radius of turn, and the ability to hover motionless at altitudes exceeding 60,000 feet. Lieutenant Harrison, speaking for the first time since his rescue, continued the narrative. We attempted to intercept. The object responded by jamming our communications, our radar, our GPS navigation systems. It was as if our aircraft suddenly became invisible to the outside world. Colonel Hayes felt the familiar weight of classified information settling over the briefing. Continue. Morrison's voice remained steady, professional. The object led us deeper into the restricted zone, always staying just beyond effective radar range, always maintaining visual contact. We followed for approximately 40 minutes before it disappeared. Disappeared how? Asked Major Jennifer Walsh, the base intelligence officer. It simply vanished. No radar signature, no heat trail, no visual contact. But by that time, we were deep in uncharted territory, our fuel was critically low, and our communications were still jammed. Santos took over the briefing. We had two choices: attempt to fly back to base on minimal fuel with no navigation aids, or find a place to land and establish survival protocols until rescue arrived. Morrison nodded. We chose to land, found a suitable canyon with enough width for emergency landings. All three aircraft touched down safely, minimal damage. The colonel studied the satellite imagery, her mind working through the tactical implications. Why didn't rescue teams find you? We had search and rescue operations running for months after your disappearance. Morrison and Santos exchanged a look that carried 17 years of shared experience. Morrison answered carefully. Because we discovered we weren't the first military unit to encounter the phenomenon, and we learned that some encounters don't end with successful rescue missions. The briefing room temperature seemed to drop by several degrees. Harrison stepped forward, his voice barely above a whisper. We found wreckage, other aircraft, some dating back to the 1950s, and we found evidence that suggested some encounters with the phenomenon resulted in permanent disappearances. Colonel Hayes realized she was holding her breath. Are you saying there's an ongoing threat in the restricted zone? Morrison's answer would haunt everyone in that room for the rest of their careers. Ma'am, we're saying the restricted zone was established for reasons that go far beyond weapons testing. And we've spent 17 years learning how to survive in an area where the normal rules of physics don't always apply. The second day of debriefing brought more questions than answers. Unit 29 had prepared detailed documentation of their 17-year survival, including hand-drawn maps of the canyon system, detailed observations of the unidentified aerial phenomenon, and most disturbing of all, a comprehensive catalog of other military aircraft they'd discovered in the restricted zone. Major Santos spread the hand-drawn charts across the briefing table, each one meticulously detailed with the precision of trained military pilots. Canyon systems, water sources, safe zones where electronic systems functioned normally, danger zones where compasses spun wildly and GPS signals died, and scattered throughout the maps, marked with red X's, the locations of crashed aircraft spanning 7 decades of military aviation. This is a P-51 Mustang from 1947, Santos pointed to one location on the map. Pilots remained still in the cockpit, dog tags intact. Captain William Henderson, Army Air Force. According to his final logbook entry, he was investigating unusual radar returns in the area. Intelligence officer Major Walsh studied the charts with growing unease. How many aircraft are we talking about, Major? 37 confirmed wrecks. Everything from World War II-era fighters to modern reconnaissance drones. Some show impact damage consistent with crashes. Others show no damage at all, as if they simply landed and never took off again. Lieutenant Harrison produced another set of documents, 17 years' worth of observation logs detailing encounters with what Unit 29 had learned to call the phenomenon. Time stamps, weather conditions, flight characteristics, pattern analysis that revealed an intelligence behind the encounters. It's not random, Harrison explained. The phenomenon appears to be studying our aircraft, our technology, our military capabilities. Each encounter follows a pattern: initial contact at the edge of the restricted zone, leading the aircraft deeper into uncharted territory, communication jamming, and then— "And then what?" Colonel Hayes asked. Morrison answered grimly. "And then either the aircraft returns to base with no memory of the encounter, or it disappears forever." The room digested this information in silence. Finally, Colonel Hayes asked the question everyone was thinking. "Why did you stay hidden? Why not attempt to return and report these findings?" Morrison's answer revealed the true scope of what Unit 29 had discovered. "Because we learned that this has been going on for decades. Every few years, aircraft go missing in the restricted zone. Official reports blame equipment failure, pilot error, weather conditions. But the pattern is consistent. The same grid references, the same communication blackouts, the same type of encounters we experienced." Santos continued the explanation. "We realize that either the military is aware of the phenomenon and has classified it beyond our security clearance, or there's been a systematic cover-up spanning multiple administrations and decades of command structure." "So you stayed hidden to investigate," Major Walsh concluded. Harrison nodded. "We established a permanent base of operations in the canyon system. We monitored radio traffic, observed flight patterns, documented every unusual occurrence in the restricted zone. We became unofficial guardians, I suppose, trying to understand what we were dealing with." Morrison stood and walked to the satellite display showing their canyon hideout. "For 17 years, we've been asking ourselves the same question. What is the United States military really protecting in the Nevada test range? And we've come to believe the answer is that we're not just protecting weapons testing from the outside world. We're protecting the outside world from something that's been here much longer than any military installation." Colonel Hayes felt the weight of command crushing down on her shoulders. In her hands was information that could fundamentally change how the military viewed the restricted zone, how they conducted operations, how they evaluated decades of missing aircraft reports. "Why now?" she asked. "Why break radio silence after 17 years?" Morrison's final answer sent a chill through the briefing room. "Because 2 weeks ago, the phenomenon changed its behavior. For the first time in 17 years, it didn't just observe. It took direct action, and we realized we couldn't handle it alone anymore." The third day brought the revelation that would change everything. Unit 29 had been maintaining detailed surveillance logs, not just of the phenomenon, but of routine military operations in the restricted zone. 17 years of observation had given them an unprecedented view of classified activities, and what they'd discovered in the past 2 weeks had finally convinced them to break radio silence. Captain Morrison activated a series of charts showing flight patterns over the past month. Red lines indicating normal military traffic, blue lines showing the phenomenon's appearances, and scattered throughout the display, yellow markers indicating something new. 3 weeks ago, the phenomenon began demonstrating new behavior, Morrison explained. Instead of simply observing our aircraft and leading them into isolated areas, it began actively intercepting military flights at the edge of the restricted zone. Major Santos added her analysis. 7 separate incidents. 3 F-22 patrols experienced total systems failure at exactly the same coordinates. 2 reconnaissance drones simply vanished from radar screens. And most concerning, a transport helicopter carrying classified materials was forced down in the desert. Colonel Hayes studied the pattern on the charts. "Are you suggesting the phenomenon has become more aggressive?" Lieutenant Harrison answered with the certainty of someone who had spent 17 years studying an opponent. "Ma'am, We're suggesting the phenomenon has learned enough about our technology to begin systematic interference with military operations. It's no longer content to simply observe and occasionally redirect aircraft. It's actively disrupting our activities in the restricted zone. Morrison walked to a detailed map of the Nevada test range, pointing to a cluster of yellow markers near the northern boundary. This is where the transport helicopter went down. We observed the entire incident from our position in the canyon system. The phenomenon didn't just jam their systems. It appeared to be scanning the helicopter, analyzing its cargo manifest, determining the classification level of the materials on board. The implications hung in the air like smoke from a crash site. Major Walsh voiced what everyone was thinking. Are you saying this phenomenon has developed the ability to distinguish classified materials from routine cargo? Santos nodded grimly. We believe it's been learning from every encounter for decades. Each aircraft it intercepts provides more data about our technological capabilities, our operational procedures, our security protocols. It's been conducting its own intelligence-gathering operation. Colonel Hayes felt the familiar chill of a security breach that went far beyond normal parameters. What happened to the transport helicopter crew? Morrison's answer was delivered with the clinical precision of a military report, but her expression revealed the emotional weight of the information. They were recovered 6 hours later, approximately 10 miles from their forced landing site. No memory of the incident. Medical evaluation showed no physical trauma, but psychological assessment revealed gaps in short-term memory consistent with selective information extraction. The briefing room went silent. Harrison continued with the most disturbing revelation. The classified materials they were transporting, technical specifications for next-generation stealth technology, were still secured in the helicopter's cargo bay. But our analysis suggests the containment seals had been opened and resealed with a precision that exceeded human capabilities. Colonel Hayes realized she was looking at a security situation that went beyond anything in military protocols. An unknown intelligence had been systematically gathering information about United States military capabilities for decades, and now it was escalating its activities. Captain Morrison, in your professional assessment, what is the current threat level posed by this phenomenon? Morrison's final assessment would be forwarded up the chain of command to the highest levels of military and civilian leadership. Ma'am, based on 17 years of observation, we believe the phenomenon represents an intelligence that has been studying our military capabilities with increasing sophistication. Its recent change in behavior suggests it has learned enough to begin active interference with our operations. She paused, looking around the room at the faces of officers who were struggling to process information that challenged everything they thought they knew about national security. In our assessment, the restricted zone should be considered a hostile intelligence-gathering environment, and we may be approaching a point where passive observation transitions to active engagement. The emergency briefing was convened at 600 hours the following morning, but this time the audience had expanded far beyond Nellis Air Force Base. Secure video links connected the briefing room to the Pentagon, NORAD, Air Combat Command, and classified facilities that Unit 29's personnel didn't recognize. The presence of civilian personnel in expensive suits suggested involvement at the highest levels of government. General Patricia Morrison, no relation to Captain Morrison, appeared on the main display screen from her office at the Pentagon. Her 4 stars carried the weight of ultimate authority, and her expression suggested she'd already been briefed on the essential details. Captain Morrison, Major Santos, Lieutenant Harrison, the general's voice carried clearly through the secure connection. Your 17 years of service in the restricted zone represent the longest continuous intelligence-gathering operation in modern military history. However, we now need to discuss information that will require elevation of your security clearances. Captain Morrison felt the familiar weight of classification levels beyond her current access. "General, we're prepared to receive whatever briefing is necessary to complete our mission." A new face appeared on a secondary monitor: Dr. Elizabeth Vance, Director of Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification. Her appearance suggested this briefing had moved beyond traditional military channels into the realm of special access programs and compartmentalized intelligence. Unit 29. What you've documented in the Nevada test range correlates with similar phenomena reported at military installations worldwide. Your survival and documentation represent the first comprehensive intelligence we've gathered on what we internally designate as anomalous aerial phenomena with demonstrated technological superiority. Major Santos felt pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to align. "Dr. Vance, are you saying our encounter was not an isolated incident?" "Major, your encounter was part of a pattern we've been tracking for over 70 years. What makes your case unique is that you survived long enough to document the intelligence behind the phenomena. Your 17 years of observation logs represent the most detailed analysis we have of intentional contact with unknown aerospace technology." Lieutenant Harrison stepped forward. "Ma'am, are we talking about extraterrestrial contact?" Dr. Vance's answer was carefully measured. "We're talking about aerospace technology that exceeds current understanding of physics and propulsion systems. The origin remains classified above your current security level. What's important is that your documentation suggests this intelligence has been conducting systematic reconnaissance of United States military capabilities." General Morrison resumed control of the briefing. "Unit 29, your mission is no longer survival and observation. Based on the escalation you've documented, we need you to return to the restricted zone as official liaisons. Your 17 years of experience make you our most qualified personnel for direct contact protocols." The room went silent as the implications sank in. Captain Morrison found her voice first. "General, are you ordering us back into the field for contact with the phenomenon?" "Captain, I'm ordering you back into the field to prevent a potential aerospace security incident that could have national and international implications. Your understanding of the phenomenon's behavior patterns makes you our best hope for establishing controlled contact, rather than allowing continued escalation." Major Santos studied the satellite imagery still displayed around the briefing room. "What kind of escalation are we talking about, General?" Dr. Vance answered with the clinical tone of someone delivering classified threat assessments. 3 days ago, similar phenomena began appearing over military installations in Colorado, Texas, and Virginia. The pattern suggests coordinated reconnaissance rather than random encounters. We may be looking at a systematic intelligence gathering operation targeting critical military facilities. Morrison felt the familiar chill of a security threat that exceeded normal parameters. "And you want Unit 29 to serve as, what, ambassadors?" General Morrison's final instructions carried the weight of a direct order from the highest levels of command. "Unit 29, you're the only military personnel who have successfully coexisted with this phenomenon for an extended period. If we're moving toward contact scenarios, we need personnel with your experience managing the interface between military operations and unknown aerospace technology." The briefing concluded with new orders that would send Unit 29 back to the Nevada desert, but this time with full military support, and a mission that went far beyond survival. They were being tasked with establishing humanity's first official contact protocols, with an intelligence that had been observing military operations for 7 decades. As the secure connections terminated and the briefing room emptied, Captain Morrison looked out the window toward the flight line where F-22 Raptors sat ready for another patrol of the restricted zone. But now everything had changed. They weren't just protecting weapons testing anymore. They were preparing for contact with an intelligence that had been studying them far longer than they had been studying it. The mission briefing for Operation Deep Contact took place in a facility that hadn't existed 17 years earlier, a classified installation built specifically for analyzing anomalous aerospace encounters. Unit 29 found themselves in a sterile conference room surrounded by technology that seemed almost alien compared to the equipment they remembered from 2007. Colonel Hayes had been promoted to mission commander, with Unit 29 serving as field specialists and contact liaisons. The mission parameters were unlike anything in military doctrine. Establish controlled contact with the phenomenon, assess its intentions regarding military operations, and determine whether continued coexistence was possible. Your mission profile includes several contingencies, Colonel Hayes explained, displaying tactical charts on a holographic interface that made Unit 29 exchange amazed glances. Primary objective: locate and establish communication with the phenomenon using protocols developed from your 17 years of observation logs. Secondary objective: determine the scope and purpose of its intelligence-gathering activities. Captain Morrison studied the new equipment laid out for their mission. Communication devices that looked like science fiction. Recording equipment capable of documenting electromagnetic anomalies. Personal protective gear designed for exposure to unknown energy fields. All of it developed specifically for contact scenarios that the military had been secretly preparing for since World War II. What happens if the phenomenon doesn't want to communicate? Major Santos asked. Dr. Vance answered via secure connection from her classified facility. Your psychological profiles suggest the phenomenon has demonstrated curiosity about human military operations for decades. Your survival indicates it's capable of coexistence. We believe it will be interested in direct communication. Lieutenant Harrison examined a piece of equipment he didn't recognize, a device that looked like a hybrid between a radio and a computer interface. What exactly are we supposed to say to an intelligence that's been observing us for 70 years? Colonel Hayes activated a display showing prepared communication protocols. You'll begin with mathematical concepts, universal constants that any technological intelligence would recognize. Prime numbers, basic physics principles, astronomical data. If the phenomenon responds, you'll gradually introduce concepts related to territorial boundaries, military operations, and peaceful coexistence. Morrison felt the weight of representing humanity in first contact scenarios. And if it doesn't want to coexist, if it views our military operations as a threat? The answer came from General Morrison via secure connection. Unit 29, your mission includes contingencies for non-hostile disengagement, but your 17 years of survival suggest the phenomenon is not inherently aggressive. It's been capable of destroying aircraft for decades, but has chosen observation over direct conflict. Santos studied the tactical displays showing current phenomenon activity across multiple military installations. General, the escalation pattern suggests it's preparing for something. Increased reconnaissance, more frequent contact, systematic data gathering. It feels like preparation for a larger operation. Dr. Vance's voice carried a note of urgency that hadn't been present in earlier briefings. Major Santos, that assessment aligns with our intelligence analysis. We believe the phenomenon may be approaching a decision point regarding continued coexistence with human military activities. Harrison voiced the question that everyone was thinking. Are we talking about potential conflict with a technologically superior intelligence? Colonel Hayes delivered the final briefing parameters with the gravity of someone who understood the historical significance of the mission. Unit 29, you're being tasked with determining whether humanity's first official contact with anomalous aerospace intelligence results in peaceful coexistence or represents a prelude to a conflict we're not prepared to fight. The mission would launch at dawn, returning Unit 29 to the canyon system they'd called home for 17 years. But this time, instead of hiding from the phenomenon, they would be actively seeking contact. Instead of survival protocols, they would be implementing communication procedures that could determine the future of human interaction with intelligences beyond current understanding. As the briefing concluded, Captain Morrison realized that Unit 29's 17 years of isolation had been preparation for this moment. They had been inadvertently trained for humanity's first diplomatic mission to an intelligence that had been observing human civilization from the shadows of restricted airspace. The mission was scheduled to begin in 12 hours, and everything they had learned during their exile in the desert would be put to the ultimate test. The modified Black Hawks lifted off from Nellis just after sunrise, carrying Unit 29 back to the canyon system that had been their secret home for 17 years. But this time, the helicopters were loaded with communication equipment, recording devices, and technology designed specifically for anomalous contact scenarios. The mission designation was classified at levels that required special access clearances, but the personnel involved understood they were making history. Captain Morrison sat in the helicopter's cargo bay, studying equipment manuals for devices that hadn't existed when Unit 29 originally disappeared. Quantum communication arrays, electromagnetic field detectors, recording systems capable of documenting phenomena that conventional instruments couldn't detect. All of it designed for a mission that challenged every assumption about military operations and national security. The landscape below hadn't changed. Still the same harsh desert, the same twisted rock formations, the same endless expanse of badlands that could hide secrets for decades. But Morrison's perspective had shifted. What had once been a hostile environment requiring survival skills was now a meeting ground for contact between species, between intelligences separated by technological capabilities that spanned centuries of development. 5 minutes to LZ, the pilot announced over the intercom. Weather conditions are optimal. No unusual electromagnetic activity detected. Major Santos checked the portable communication array one final time. The device represented 17 years of technological advancement, but it was designed to interface with the same phenomenon they'd been observing with primitive equipment since 2007. "Rebecca, are you ready for this?" Morrison looked toward the canyon system that had sheltered them for nearly 2 decades. Somewhere in those twisted passages of sandstone and shadow, they had learned to coexist with an intelligence that exceeded human understanding. Now they were returning to formalize that relationship. "I've been ready for 17 years," Morrison replied. "The question is whether the phenomenon is ready for direct contact." The helicopter touched down at the same landing zone where Master Sergeant Thompson's rescue team had first made contact with Unit 29. But this time, the aircraft disgorged sophisticated equipment and personnel trained specifically for anomalous contact procedures. The mission had the support of resources that Unit 29 could never have imagined during their years of isolation. Lieutenant Harrison activated the quantum communication array, and immediately the device began detecting electromagnetic signatures that conventional instruments missed entirely. "I'm getting readings consistent with our 17 years of observation logs. The phenomenon is active in this area." Colonel Hayes, serving as mission commander, established a perimeter around the landing zone while Unit 29 prepared their equipment. "Unit 29, you have operational command for contact protocols. My team will provide security and documentation support." Morrison shouldered the portable communication device and began walking toward the mouth of the canyon. After 17 years, she knew every rock formation, every hidden passage, every location where the phenomenon had demonstrated its presence. Now she was returning to those coordinates with official authorization to establish humanity's first direct communication with anomalous aerospace intelligence. "Control, Unit 29 Alpha," Morrison spoke into her radio. Beginning approach to primary contact coordinates. All systems operational. No hostile activity detected. But as the team moved deeper into the canyon system, Morrison felt a familiar sensation, the same electromagnetic pressure she'd learned to associate with the phenomenon's presence. After 17 years, she could sense its approach before any instruments detected unusual activity. And today, something felt different. The phenomenon wasn't hiding in the shadows, observing from a distance. Today, it was waiting for them. The contact location was a natural amphitheater in the canyon system, a circular depression surrounded by sandstone walls that rose toward the desert sky like the ruins of an ancient cathedral. Unit 29 had discovered this location during their third year of exile, and it had become the site of their most significant observations of phenomenon activity. Now it would become the stage for humanity's first official attempt at interspecies communication. Morrison activated the quantum communication array at the center of the amphitheater, while Santos and Harrison positioned recording equipment at strategic locations around the perimeter. The device hummed with barely contained energy, its display screens showing electromagnetic patterns that had been theoretical until Unit 29's survival provided practical data for engineering applications. Control, Unit 29 Alpha, Morrison reported. We're in position at primary contact coordinates, beginning initial communication protocols. The first phase involved transmitting mathematical concepts, prime number sequences, geometric progressions, universal constants that any technological intelligence would recognize as artificial rather than naturally occurring. The quantum array projected these concepts as modulated electromagnetic pulses, broadcasting across the entire spectrum at power levels designed to penetrate the strange interference fields that surrounded phenomenon manifestations. For 30 minutes, they transmitted basic mathematical concepts while sophisticated recording equipment documented every electromagnetic fluctuation in the canyon. Then Harrison's instruments detected the first response. Rebecca, I'm getting structured returns on multiple frequencies, not random electromagnetic noise. This is definitely artificial. The response came as a series of complex mathematical progressions that started with the same prime numbers Unit 29 had transmitted, then expanded into geometric sequences that exceeded human mathematical knowledge. The phenomenon was demonstrating not just intelligence, but intelligence that surpassed human understanding of mathematical relationships. Santos monitored the communication exchange with growing amazement. It's not just responding to our mathematics, it's teaching us. These equations, they're showing us mathematical relationships that we haven't discovered yet. Morrison felt the weight of first contact settling over the canyon like desert heat. After 17 years of observation, she was finally engaged in direct communication with the intelligence that had been studying human military operations since the 1940s. Control, Unit 29 Alpha. We have established successful mathematical communication with the phenomenon, proceeding to Phase 2 protocols. Phase 2 involved transmitting concepts related to territorial boundaries, military operations, and peaceful coexistence. But as Morrison prepared to initiate the next phase of communication, something unprecedented happened. The air above the amphitheater began to shimmer with heat distortion, though the temperature remained constant. The electromagnetic readings spiked beyond the measurement capabilities of their instruments, and slowly, gradually, a shape began to materialize in the center of the canyon. Harrison's voice carried across the radio with barely controlled excitement. Control, Unit 29 Charlie. We have visual manifestation of the phenomenon. Repeat, we have direct visual contact. The shape that emerged from the shimmering air defied easy description. Not solid in any conventional sense, but possessing definite structure and intentional form. It moved with purpose, intelligence clearly directing its actions as it positioned itself directly across from Morrison's communication array. Santos keyed her radio with hands that were surprisingly steady despite the historical significance of the moment. Control, Unit 29 Bravo. The phenomenon is demonstrating direct physical manifestation. It appears to be preparing for contact. Morrison realized she was looking at the intelligence that had shaped 17 years of her life, the unseen presence that had made Unit 29's survival possible by teaching them the hidden rules of existence in the restricted zone. Now it was revealing itself completely, abandoning the shadows for direct contact with human representatives. Control, Unit 29 Alpha. Morrison's voice carried the authority of someone representing humanity in its first official interspecies diplomatic contact. Beginning Phase 2 communication protocols. We are attempting to establish concept of peaceful coexistence. The next transmission would determine whether humanity's relationship with anomalous aerospace intelligence remained one of coexistence or evolved into something entirely unprecedented in human history. The phenomenon's response to concepts of peaceful coexistence came not as mathematical equations, but as direct information transfer that bypassed conventional communication entirely. Morrison felt knowledge entering her consciousness, not words or images, but pure information that assembled itself into understanding as if it had always been part of her memory. The intelligence identified itself through concepts that had no human equivalent, not a name, but an identity that encompassed millennia of observation, study, and careful non-interference with developing civilizations. It had been present on Earth since before human written history, observing the progression of technology from stone tools to nuclear weapons to space flight. Major Santos experienced the same direct information transfer, her consciousness suddenly filled with perspective that spanned geological time scales. The intelligence wasn't alien in the conventional sense. It was ancient, terrestrial in origin, but evolved far beyond current human understanding. It had watched civilizations rise and fall, had observed the development of human military technology with the patience of something for whom centuries passed like seasons. Lieutenant Harrison's instruments registered massive electromagnetic fluctuations as the information transfer continued, but the data being exchanged exceeded anything their recording equipment could document. The true communication was happening at a level that transcended conventional technology, direct consciousness to consciousness contact that made 17 years of mathematical radio transmissions seem primitive by comparison. Morrison found herself understanding concepts that human language couldn't express. The restricted zone had been established not to protect weapons testing from observation, but to protect human technological development from interference. The intelligence had been maintaining a careful balance, allowing human military advancement to proceed naturally, while preventing contact that might accelerate development beyond sustainable parameters. The aerospace phenomena that military personnel had encountered for decades weren't reconnaissance missions in the conventional sense. They were maintenance operations, subtle interventions designed to prevent human technology from advancing too rapidly, from developing capabilities that might destabilize the careful equilibrium the intelligence had maintained for millennia. Santos realized with growing amazement that Unit 29's 17-year survival had been intentional. They hadn't been hiding from the intelligence. They'd been under its protection, serving as unofficial ambassadors who could gradually adapt to the reality of non-human intelligence without the psychological shock that might result from sudden, unprepared contact. Control, Unit 29. Morrison's radio transmission carried information that would revolutionize human understanding of their place in the universe. The phenomenon is not extraterrestrial. It's terrestrial intelligence that predates human civilization by thousands of years. It's been managing human technological development to prevent us from developing too quickly to handle our own capabilities. The intelligence continued its direct communication, sharing concepts that recontextualized 70 years of UFO encounters, mysterious aircraft disappearances, and inexplicable technological failures near military installations. These hadn't been hostile actions or random phenomena. They had been carefully orchestrated interventions designed to moderate the pace of human military development. Harrison felt his understanding of military history reshaping itself as new information integrated with his existing knowledge. Control. The intelligence indicates that human nuclear weapons development triggered more active intervention protocols. The increased sightings near military bases since the 1940s weren't reconnaissance. They were monitoring operations to prevent nuclear conflicts. Colonel Hayes's voice crackled over the radio from the command position. Unit 29, are you saying this intelligence has been preventing nuclear war? Santos answered with the certainty of someone who had experienced direct knowledge transfer. Colonel, it's been preventing technological catastrophes that we didn't even know were possible. Nuclear war was just the most obvious threat. There are other developmental paths that could have led to civilizational collapse. The intelligence's final communication to Unit 29 carried both warning and opportunity. Human technological development was approaching decision points that could no longer be managed through subtle intervention. The time for covert guidance was ending. Humanity would soon need to accept conscious cooperation with older intelligences or risk destabilizing the careful balance that had allowed civilization to develop safely. Morrison's last transmission from the canyon would change everything. Control, Unit 29 Alpha. The phenomenon is offering direct technological cooperation to prevent potential civilizational threats that exceed human understanding. But the offer requires acknowledgement of non-human intelligence participating in decisions about technological development. The choice was no longer between human independence and unknown interference. The choice was between conscious cooperation with ancient terrestrial intelligence or attempting to navigate technological development without guidance that had been protecting human civilization for centuries. The return flight to Nellis Air Force Base carried more than Unit 29 and their equipment. It carried information that would require fundamental changes in how humanity understood its relationship with intelligence, technology, and planetary stewardship. The debriefing would take weeks, but the implications would reshape human civilization for generations. Morrison looked down at the Nevada desert falling away beneath the helicopter and realized that Unit 29's 17 years of exile had been preparation not just for contact, but for serving as humanity's first ambassadors to intelligences that had been guiding human development since before recorded history. Their survival story had become a first contact story, and their mission was just beginning. The expanded debriefing took place in a facility that Unit 29 learned had been constructed specifically for this possibility, a classified installation designed for processing information from successful anomalous contact scenarios. The conference room was filled with representatives from military branches, intelligence agencies, scientific institutions, and civilian leadership that Unit 29 hadn't known existed. Dr. Vance had been joined by colleagues from institutions with names that sounded like academic departments, but carried the weight of special access programs. The Institute for Advanced Aerospace Studies, the Department of Anomalous Technology Integration, the Office of Non-Conventional Intelligence Assessment. Each represented decades of preparation for the possibility that Unit 29 had just made reality. The information transfer you experienced represents the most comprehensive intelligence briefing in human history, Dr. Vance explained as she reviewed the preliminary analysis of Unit 29's contact report. Our linguistic specialists are working to translate concepts that don't have equivalents in human language, but the basic framework is clear. We've been in a managed first contact scenario for over 70 years. Captain Morrison felt the strange disorientation of seeing her 17-year survival story recontextualized as humanity's longest diplomatic mission. Dr. Vance, the intelligence made it clear that human technological development is approaching critical decision points. What kind of time frame are we talking about? General Morrison appeared on the secure video connection from a location that the system identified only as classified alpha. Unit 29, based on the intelligence's communication, we have approximately 18 months before human technological development reaches parameters that require either direct intervention or conscious cooperation. Major Santos studied the preliminary reports scattered across the briefing table. What kind of technological development? Are we talking about military applications? Dr. Vance activated a holographic display showing technological advancement projections that extended far beyond conventional military research. The intelligence indicated several critical development paths: quantum computing applications that could destabilize global information systems, artificial intelligence development that could exceed human control parameters, and aerospace propulsion research that could result in uncontrolled access to technologies beyond our ability to manage safely. Lieutenant Harrison realized they were discussing technological threats that conventional military planning had never considered. Are we talking about existential risks to human civilization? The answer came from a new participant in the briefing, someone whose security clearance exceeded anything Unit 29 had encountered. The name displayed on the secure connection was simply Director Omega, and the background was completely classified. Unit 29, the intelligence you contacted, represents one of several terrestrial intelligences that have been managing developmental risks for multiple species over geological time scales. Human civilization is approaching the same technological transition points that have resulted in extinction or transcendence for hundreds of previous civilizations. Morrison felt the weight of representing humanity in decisions that exceeded any previous military responsibility. Sir, the intelligence offered technological cooperation. What would that involve? Captain Morrison, you and your team are being offered positions as humanity's first official liaisons to non-human terrestrial intelligence. Your 17 years of successful coexistence make you uniquely qualified to serve as interfaces between human institutions and intelligences that operate on completely different temporal and conceptual scales. Santos examined documentation that outlined proposed cooperation frameworks. What would this cooperation look like in practical terms? Dr. Vance answered with the careful precision of someone describing classified programs that were about to become operational reality. Major Santos, we're discussing integrated research programs where human scientists work directly with non-human intelligence to develop technologies that support civilization rather than threatening it. Aerospace applications that provide sustainable energy rather than weapons systems. Computing applications that enhance human capability rather than replacing human decision-making. Colonel Hayes, who had remained silent throughout the briefing, finally asked the question that everyone was considering. What happens if we decline cooperation? Director Omega's response carried the weight of someone who had access to information that spanned decades of classified planning. Colonel Hayes, the intelligence made it clear that human technological development will continue with or without cooperation. But without guidance, the probability of civilizational collapse within 50 years approaches statistical certainty. Morrison realized that Unit 29's survival story had become humanity's survival story. Their choice to accept 17 years of exile rather than risk exposing classified information had prepared them to make choices that would determine whether human civilization successfully navigated the transition to technological maturity. Unit 29. General Morrison's voice carried the authority of a direct order from the highest levels of command. You're being offered the opportunity to serve as humanity's first official ambassadors to intelligences that have been protecting our civilization for centuries. Your acceptance would represent the beginning of conscious cooperation between human institutions and non-human terrestrial intelligence. The choice they faced exceeded any decision in military history, but Unit 29 had been preparing for this moment since their first encounter with the phenomenon 17 years earlier in the Nevada desert. The transition from military pilots to interspecies ambassadors took place over several months of intensive preparation that challenged every assumption Unit 29 had developed about reality, technology, and human civilization. The training facility, officially designated as the Institute for Advanced Cooperation Studies, was located in a classified installation that seemed to blend cutting-edge human technology with design principles that had no human origin. Captain Morrison found herself studying communication protocol that went far beyond the mathematical concepts they'd used for first contact. The ancient intelligence operated on temporal scales that measured individual human lifespans as brief intervals, but it had developed techniques for compressing complex concepts into formats that human consciousness could process without psychological damage. The technology integration sessions were the most challenging aspect of the preparation. Unit 29 learned to interface with devices that combined human engineering with principles derived from millions of years of non-human technological development. The equipment wasn't alien, it was terrestrial, but evolved beyond current human understanding of what technology could become. Major Santos discovered that her 17 years of desert survival had been unconscious preparation for understanding technologies that operated through integration with natural systems rather than domination of environmental conditions. The intelligence had been teaching them sustainable technological principles through practical experience, preparing them for cooperation that would require fundamental changes in how humans approached technological development. Lieutenant Harrison's background in aircraft systems proved invaluable for understanding propulsion technologies that seemed to violate conventional physics, but operated through deeper understanding of electromagnetic and gravitational relationships. The aerospace phenomena that had seemed impossible during their first encounter were simply applications of physics principles that human science hadn't yet discovered. Unit 29. Your role as ambassadors will require you to serve as interpreters between human institutions and intelligence that operates on completely different conceptual frameworks, explained Dr. Sarah Kim, the Director of Integration Protocols. You'll be translating not just language, but entire worldviews. Morrison realized that their diplomatic mission would require skills that no previous military training had addressed. Dr. Kim, how do we represent human interests to an intelligence that's been observing our civilization for thousands of years? Captain Morrison, the intelligence isn't interested in controlling human development. It's interested in preventing civilizational collapse. Your role will be to help human institutions understand how to develop technology that supports long-term civilization rather than threatening it. The cooperation frameworks that Unit 29 studied represented a fundamental shift in how human organizations would approach research, development, and implementation of advanced technologies. Instead of competitive development driven by military applications, they would be participating in collaborative research designed to enhance human capabilities while preventing destabilization of natural systems. Santos found herself studying environmental integration protocols that treated technological development as an extension of natural ecological processes rather than artificial systems imposed on natural environments. This is completely different from conventional military technology. Instead of dominating environments, we're learning to integrate with them. Harrison examined propulsion systems that generated lift and thrust through electromagnetic field manipulation rather than chemical combustion or mechanical force. These aircraft don't fight against gravity. They use gravitational fields as part of their propulsion system. The most challenging aspect of the preparation was psychological adaptation to working with intelligence that exceeded human conceptual capabilities. Unit 29 learned meditation techniques, consciousness expansion protocols, and mental flexibility exercises that would allow them to interface with non-human intelligence without losing their essential human perspective. Your 17 years of coexistence have already prepared you for the psychological aspects of cooperation, Dr. Kim explained during their final preparation session. You've learned to accept the presence of intelligence that exceeds human understanding without losing your human identity. Morrison looked out the window of the training facility toward the flight line, where conventional F-22 Raptors sat beside aircraft that incorporated non-human technological principles. The future they were preparing to represent looked like science fiction, but it felt like natural progression from the survival skills they'd developed during 17 years in the Nevada desert. Dr. Kim, when do we begin active ambassadorial duties? Captain Morrison, you begin tomorrow. The integration protocols are being implemented at research facilities around the world, and Unit 29 will be serving as liaison personnel to ensure that human researchers can work effectively with non-human intelligence without losing the essential human perspective that makes this cooperation valuable. Unit 29's transformation from missing pilots to interspecies ambassadors would begin with a mission that combined everything they'd learned during 17 years of survival with everything they'd discovered about the ancient intelligence that had been guiding human civilization toward technological maturity. The first cooperative research facility represented a fundamental departure from conventional military installations. Located in the same Nevada desert where Unit 29 had survived for 17 years, the installation combined human engineering with design principles that seemed to grow organically from the landscape rather than being imposed upon it. Morrison walked through corridors that curved like natural cave systems, but were lined with technology that exceeded anything in conventional military or civilian applications. The building itself seemed to breathe, adjusting temperature, humidity, and electromagnetic fields in response to the activities taking place within its walls. "Welcome to Integration Station Alpha," said Dr. Jennifer Park, the facility director. This installation represents the first permanent cooperation site between human and non-human terrestrial intelligence. Your role as ambassadors will be to facilitate communication between human researchers and intelligence that operates on completely different temporal and conceptual scales. Santos examined research areas where human scientists worked alongside manifestations of the ancient intelligence, developing technologies that seemed to blend advanced physics with natural ecological principles. Solar energy collection systems that operated like photosynthetic processes, but achieved efficiency levels impossible with conventional technology. Computing systems that processed information through biological rather than electronic networks. How do the human researchers adapt to working with non-human intelligence? Santos asked. Dr. Park led them to an observation area overlooking the main research floor. The key is understanding that the intelligence doesn't want to replace human creativity. It wants to guide human technological development toward applications that support rather than threaten long-term civilization. Harrison watched human engineers collaborating with intelligence manifestations that appeared as shifting fields of organized energy rather than solid forms. The cooperation looked like advanced scientific research, but the underlying principles challenged everything conventional science understood about the relationship between consciousness, technology, and natural systems. Lieutenant Harrison, as aerospace specialist, you'll be working primarily with propulsion research that integrates human aerospace engineering with non-human understanding of gravitational and electromagnetic field manipulation, Dr. Park explained. The goal is to develop transportation systems that support human expansion into space while maintaining sustainable relationships with planetary ecosystems. Morrison realized that their ambassadorial role would require them to serve as cultural interpreters, helping human institutions understand how to maintain human values and perspectives, while accepting guidance from intelligence that exceeded human understanding by millions of years of development. Dr. Park, what happens when human institutions resist cooperation, when they want to maintain independent technological development? Captain Morrison, that's where your diplomatic skills become essential. The intelligence has made it clear that cooperation is optional, but the consequences of independent development include technological risks that exceed human ability to manage safely. The research activities Morrison observed represented possibilities that conventional science would have dismissed as impossible. But Unit 29's 17 years of coexistence had prepared them to accept technological applications that transcended current understanding of physics, biology, and consciousness. Santos watched human medical researchers working with intelligence applications that seemed to diagnose and treat conditions through direct interface with biological systems. This is like watching science fiction become operational reality. Major Santos, medical applications represent some of the most promising areas of cooperation, Dr. Park explained. The intelligence has been observing human biological development for thousands of years. Its understanding of human physiology exceeds our current medical knowledge by centuries. Harrison examined aerospace research areas where human engineers were learning to develop aircraft that operated through field manipulation rather than mechanical systems. The vehicles looked like abstract art, but their performance capabilities exceeded anything in conventional military applications. Dr. Park, how do we explain these technological applications to military leadership that's been trained in conventional engineering principles? Lieutenant Harrison, that's exactly why Unit 29 was chosen as ambassadors. Your 17 years of survival in an environment where conventional rules didn't apply has prepared you to serve as interpreters between conventional military thinking and technological possibilities that exceed current understanding. Morrison realized that Integration Station Alpha represented the future they were helping to create. A future where human civilization developed in conscious cooperation, with intelligence that could guide technological advancement toward applications that supported rather than threatened long-term survival and prosperity. Their work as ambassadors was just beginning, but Unit 29 had already become the bridge between human civilization and its next phase of development. The global implementation of cooperation protocols required Unit 29 to travel to classified installations around the world, serving as ambassadors between human institutions and ancient intelligence that had been managing technological development risks for multiple civilizations across geological time scales. Each facility presented unique challenges in cultural integration and technological adaptation. Morrison found herself at a research station in the Swiss Alps, where European scientists were developing energy systems that operated through direct interface with geological processes. The technology harvested energy from tectonic activities, but the implementation required understanding that exceeded conventional physics by incorporating consciousness as a fundamental force in electromagnetic field manipulation. Captain Morrison, our researchers are having difficulty accepting technological applications that require conscious participation, explained Dr. Andreas Weber, the facility's director. European scientific tradition emphasizes mechanical rather than conscious interaction with natural systems. Morrison had learned during her months of preparation that the ancient intelligence operated through principles that treated consciousness as fundamental to technological applications, rather than separate from mechanical processes. Dr. Weber, the key is understanding that consciousness isn't separate from technology. Consciousness is the technology. The intelligence has been demonstrating this principle for millions of years. Santos was assigned to a facility in the Australian outback, where military researchers were developing defensive systems that operated through integration with natural electromagnetic fields rather than artificial energy projection. The technology could protect entire geographic regions from hostile actions, but the implementation required acceptance that defensive systems could be sustainable and ecological rather than destructive and artificial. Major Santos, our military specialists are concerned about relying on defensive technologies that don't involve destructive capabilities, said Colonel Patricia Reynolds, the military liaison for Australian cooperation protocols. How do we convince military leadership to adopt defensive strategies based on protection rather than retaliation? Santos had discovered during her 17 years of desert survival that the most effective protection came from integration with natural systems rather than domination of environmental conditions. Colonel Reynolds, the intelligence has been demonstrating for 70 years that the most advanced defensive capabilities operate through integration rather than destruction. Our survival depended on learning these principles. Harrison was working at a facility in Japan where aerospace researchers were developing transportation systems that operated through gravitational field manipulation rather than chemical or mechanical propulsion. The aircraft achieved performance capabilities impossible with conventional technology, but the implementation required understanding of physics principles that human science was just beginning to discover. Lieutenant Harrison, our engineers are struggling with propulsion systems that seem to violate conservation of energy principles, explained Dr. Hiroshi Tanaka, the aerospace research director. How do we implement technologies that exceed our understanding of fundamental physics? Harrison had learned through his work with integration protocols that the ancient intelligence operated through physics principles that were more fundamental than current human understanding, but not different from natural laws, just more complete applications of universal principles. Dr. Tanaka, these technologies don't violate physics. They demonstrate physics principles that we haven't discovered yet. The intelligence is teaching us how natural laws actually work at deeper levels. The coordination between global facilities required Unit 29 to develop communication protocols that could translate concepts between different cultural approaches to technology, different languages, and different institutional frameworks. They became interpreters not just between human and non-human intelligence, but between different human approaches to understanding cooperation with advanced intelligence. Morrison coordinated daily briefings with facility directors around the world, managing integration challenges that ranged from technical difficulties to psychological resistance to cultural conflicts between human institutional traditions and